The tomb is sealed, the city is asleep, and beneath the church floor in Myra, a saint's bones are floating in holy liquid. 60 men from Bari come as pilgrims. They leave as thieves. By sunrise, a town is screaming at the sea, and Santa Claus is already disappearing over the horizon.
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
In the Middle Ages, faith had a price, and sometimes the price was paid not in blood, but in bone. Tonight's story begins in a coastal church in Myra, modern-day Turkey, where the body of a beloved saint lay undisturbed for centuries. Saint Nicholas, protector of children, patron saint of sailors, and through a long chain of legend, one of the roots of Santa Claus himself. But in the year 1087 AD, a band of men from Bari arrived with a plan that would shock the Christian world. They would open the tomb, they would take what was inside, and they would call it salvation. What followed was a trail of grief, rivalry, and miracles that seeped from stone, an ancient liquid still collected to this very day. It's a story of devotion and deception, and a question that refuses to die. Did they steal a saint, or did the saint choose to be stolen? We're telling that story tonight. In a dim crypt beneath a basilica in coastal Italy, a marble tomb sweats mysterious drops of liquid. Each spring on May 9th, a priest stoops with a vial to collect this clear manna, as they call it, weeping from the stone, a substance believers call holy and healing. It is a ritual both festive and eerie, a yearly gift from the grave of Saint Nicholas of Myra, better known to the world as the model for the jolly Santa Claus. Far above, in the sunlit streets of Bari, Italy, locals parade a statue of the saint from the harbor to his basilica, commemorating the day his relics arrived in the city. Choirs sing and church bells peal, yet this joyful celebration marks one of history's most audacious grave robberies. Over 9 centuries ago, the bones, now oozing miracle water in Bari, were stolen from Nicholas's grave in what one scholar bluntly calls a holy robbery, a caper fueled by faith, desperation, and medieval opportunism. This is the uncanny true story of how the relics of a 4th century bishop, patron of children, sailors, and the poor, were plundered and fought over. It's the story of how they came to exude a mystical liquid, and how the legend of Saint Nicholas grew and evolved into the cheerful myth of Santa Claus. It's a tale of miracles and mayhem, with an atmosphere at once festive but also haunting. Prepare to journey to the late 11th century, when Italian sailors conspired to steal Santa's bones and set into motion a saga of sacred thefts, rival cities, and a Christmas spirit born from the most macabre of true crimes. St. Nicholas had been dead for nearly 744 years by the spring of 1087 AD. In life, he was the bishop of Myra, a Greek-speaking city in Asia Minor, modern-day Demre, Turkey. Little can be confirmed about Nicholas's biography, but legend paints him as a man of extraordinary generosity and piety. Born in the 3rd century to a wealthy family, he allegedly gave away his inheritance to help the needy, including a famous story in which he secretly saved 3 destitute young sisters from being sold into slavery by tossing bags of gold through their window at night, providing dowries so they could marry. His kindness and reputed miracles, from calming storms at sea to resurrecting murdered children, according to medieval lore, made Nicholas so beloved that he was honored as a saint soon after his death on December 6, 343 AD. His tomb in Myra became a pilgrimage site, and by the Middle Ages, Nicholas was one of the most revered saints in Christendom. Devotees believed his remains themselves held power. From at least the 6th century, pilgrims in Myra claimed that Nicholas's bones secreted a sweet-smelling liquid, a miraculous substance they called myron, or manna, which could heal sickness and worked wonders for the faithful. The very tomb of St. Nicholas was said to sweat his holy myrrh, as if the saint's generosity overflowed even in death. By the 11th century, however, Nicholas's homeland had fallen into turmoil. Myra was part of the Byzantine Empire during a dire turning point in 1071, when invading Seljuk Turks defeated the Byzantines and overran much of Asia Minor. Christian shrines across the region were suddenly in peril. In Nicholas's case, both genuine piety and political self-interest put a target on his grave. The relics of saints, their bones or other physical remains, were the most precious treasures of the medieval church. Cities and monasteries vied for such relics, which were believed to confer divine favor and often attracted crowds of pilgrims and their purses from far and wide. A thriving pilgrimage center could transform a town's fortunes entirely, and no saint was more popular than Nicholas, whose feast day, December 6th, and charitable reputation were celebrated across Europe. Thus, when news spread that Nicholas's tomb in Myra might fall under infidel control or be lost entirely, a frenzy ignited to rescue the saint's remains for the Christian West. In truth, this rescue often amounted to furta sacra, Latin for sacred theft, a practice by which churches or cities stole holy relics under the justification of faith. Medieval Christians convinced themselves that if a saint's bones could be successfully stolen, it must be by the saint's own will. As one historian notes, practically every Western chronicler of the era recorded the dramatic removal of St. Nicholas's relics in 1087. It was an event of international intrigue, and it began with a band of sailors from the Italian port of Bari, scheming to outfox their rivals and snatch the prize for themselves. Bari in the late 1080s was a rising power on the Adriatic coast. Only a decade earlier, in 1071, the very year Myra was overrun, Bari had been the last Byzantine foothold in southern Italy. It fell to the Norman lords, who now ruled the region. The city's new Latin Christian elite were eager to put Bari on the map spiritually and economically. They knew that possessing the illustrious relics of St. Nicholas would instantly elevate Bari into a major pilgrimage destination, a source of both religious prestige and material prosperity. According to later accounts, Venice, Bari's maritime rival to the north, had a similar idea. The Venetians, famed for acquiring relics, they had stolen St. Mark's body from Egypt in the 9th century, hungered to claim Nicholas as well. A hidden competition brewed between the two cities' sailors as to who would reach Myra first and secure the saint. In early 1087, word reached Bari that a Venetian expedition was being outfitted to sail for Nicholas's tomb. The race was on. The men of Bari were determined to win by any means necessary. Thus, it was in the spring of 1087, 3 ships set sail from Bari, ostensibly on a trading voyage to the eastern Mediterranean. These ships carried about 62 armed men, including sailors, merchants, and 2 priests, acting under the sponsorship of Bari's noble families. When they arrived at the coast of Lycia in early May, the Bari contingent learned that the Venetians were indeed not far behind. Wasting no time, the Barians plotted a daring mission ashore at Myra, where Nicholas's relics lay buried in the Church of St. Nicholas. This was enemy territory. Myra was under Turkish dominion, and the shrine was tended by Greek Orthodox monks, so the Italians resorted to subterfuge. Disguising themselves as humble pilgrims, the men from Bari made their way to the church and approached the resident monks, requesting to venerate the tomb of St. Nicholas. The monks, unsuspecting, led the foreigners into the crypt and showed them the location of the saint's sarcophagus. Only then did suspicion begin to flicker. According to one account, the monks suddenly demanded of the visitors, quote, "Why, you men, do you make such a request? You haven't planned to carry off the remains of the holy saint from here. If that is your purpose, know that you parley with unyielding men, even if it mean our death." The Bari sailors tried to smooth over the accusation with pious words, even professing that they had come only to reverence the body of Nicholas. But their true intentions could not stay hidden for long. Tension thickened in the candlelit gloom of the crypt. The monks of Myra soon noticed the Italians casting calculating glances at the heavy marble slab covering Nicholas's tomb. The atmosphere turned from reverent to menacing. Suddenly, one of the Barians, a tall, hot-blooded man named Matthew, lost patience and drew his sword. Seizing a monk by the robe, he pressed the blade to the clergyman's throat and growled out a threat. "Show us the exact spot of the saint's body, or die." Aghast, the monk pleaded for mercy and insisted that Nicholas's holy tomb lay just beneath the floor, where they stood. At this, the disguise of piety was dropped. The heist was on. The Italian sailors rushed to bar the church's doors, shoving a heavy bolt into place to prevent any townspeople from interrupting. A couple of armed men kept guard over the trembling monks. Others set to work trying to breach the tomb embedded in the floor. They had come prepared for a fight, but cracking open a saint's grave was its own challenge, and its own risk as well. Medieval lore warned that stealing relics could invite divine wrath if the saint did not approve. Indeed, one chronicler notes the thieves, quote, were not only afraid of being caught, but also of the power of Saint Nicholas himself, punishing them for their crime. No doubt the men from Bari felt a mix of fear and adrenaline as they pried with iron tools at the stone slab. It was Matthew who took the lead, spotting a gap around a rectangular flagstone in the floor, the top of the vault. He and his companions jammed crowbars into the seam and heaved. The stone refused to budge at first, sealed by centuries and perhaps by the saint's own stubborn will. The group paused, sweating and unsure, and even considered giving up when the slab wouldn't yield at all. Then one of the priests from Bari, a man named Lupus, fumbled and dropped a glass vial of sacred oil he had been holding. It shattered on the floor. This jarring accident snapped the men from their hesitation. Taking it as a sign of urgency, Matthew raised a heavy mallet and brought it crashing down on the stone cover with all of his strength. At last, the slab had fractured. Matthew and the others pried the broken pieces aside and peered into the dark space below. There lay a second lid, the cover of Nicholas's sarcophagus. They managed to lift it partially, only to recoil in awe. A powerful aroma wafted out from beneath, like a sudden gust of sweet perfume, filling the crypt. The hardened sailors found themselves seeming to stand in paradise, overwhelmed by the fragrance. Within the sarcophagus, by flickering torchlight, they could see it was filled with liquid. The famous holy manna of St. Nicholas was literally pooling around his bones. The men were stunned. To them, this was a sure sign of divine favor. The miraculous oil that Nicholas's relics produced was now aiding their quest. It was as if the saint himself were saying, "Come and take me." Any lingering doubt or fear of a curse evaporated. With a shout of triumph, Matthew flung aside caution. The chronicler writes that he, unable to restrain the ardor of his heart, leapt bodily into the tomb, shoes and all, splashing into the sacred myrrh up to his knees. What Matthew beheld in that flooded sarcophagus must have made his breath catch. There, half submerged in clear oil, lay the skeletal remains of St. Nicholas, bones glowing like coals of fire, fragrant above all fragrance. For a moment, the gruff seaman was transformed into an awestruck pilgrim. He gently lifted handfuls of the bones, kissing them and caressing them in reverence. Piece by piece, Matthew passed the sacred relics up out of the tomb to the waiting priests, Lupus and another named Grimaldus. They wrapped the bones carefully in a clean cloak. In their haste and wonder, the men did not manage to grab every last fragment, but they took all of the major bones of the skeleton, including Nicholas's skull, limb bones, and spine. The smallest chips and some crumbled fragments were left behind in the oily sludge. Those would become important later. They also attempted to steal a beautiful ancient icon of St. Nicholas that hung in the church, but according to legend, the icon miraculously bolted itself in place and refused to be moved. It seemed the saint did not wish to leave his former sanctuary entirely bereft. Something of him would remain. Satisfied that they had gathered the holy bones, the raiders bundled the relics into a wooden chest and secured it shut. All the while, the gagged and cowed monks looked on in horror and despair. Now, as the Bari sailors shouldered their precious loot and prepared to flee, the spell broke, and the monks began to wail. "Oh, how great and inconsolable an affliction has overtaken us!" one cried, tearing his robes in anguish. In a keening chorus, the clergy of Myra lamented their loss. "Why are you leaving us, Father, orphaned of your protection? To whom shall we flee? Who will guard us from our enemies now?" Some even turned their grief toward Nicholas himself, angrily questioning why the saint would abandon them after centuries. "You have become well-disposed to strangers and wayfarers, while to us, your servants from youth, you have shown yourself unhearing. You have reckoned as nothing the ministrations of our fathers and ourselves." As the intruders pressed out of the church with the reliquary chest, the monks' mourning grew frenzied. They knew their beloved patron and protector, the soul of their town, was being taken forever. Some monks even prostrated themselves on the floor, sobbing that they would rather have died than seen this day. "Why did you not allow us to be given death rather than be separated from you, O benign Father?" Outside, word of the sacrilege spread quickly. By the time the sailors of Bari hustled their way down to the harbor, a crowd of Myra's townspeople had assembled in panic and fury. Men, women, and children, a multitude filled with affliction, swarmed the wharf, wailing and begging for the return of their saint. As the Italians began boarding their ship, clutching the chest containing Nicholas's bones, the people of Myra made a desperate last stand. They rushed knee-deep into the sea, surrounding the vessels, clinging to the oars and rudders in a human blockade. Through tears they cried out, "Who are you, and from what land, that you have dared bring such calamity upon us? Give us back our patron and champion, who protected us from our enemies, visible and not." Seeing the thieves unmoved, the people pleaded for at least a token of what they were losing. "If we are entirely unworthy, do not leave us without a share. Give us at least a small portion of him." It was an astonishing scene. An entire city weeping and grasping at a ship, imploring that a fragment of a finger bone or a scrap of cloth be left to them. Anything from the saint who had been the beating heart of their community for 700 years. But the men of Bari, though perhaps momentarily touched, had no intention of relinquishing their prize. Standing on the deck, one of the Bari leaders tried to address the crowd. He raised his hands and spoke kindly to the devastated Myrans. "We are Christians like you," he insisted, "and the saint appeared to us in a vision, bidding us carry his remains away. It is God's will," he argued, "that St. Nicholas now give light to the Western world after so many generations protecting the East." The speaker promised that Myra would not be entirely forsaken. "In place of these remains, you still have his holy tomb, from which all holy oil wells forth, and his venerable icon, which works wonders." Bari, he claimed, had as much need of a patron as Myra. Surely it was just, in God's plan, that our preeminent city of Bari should possess so great a father and protector. These words, though diplomatic, gave little comfort to the people of Myra. As the ships prepared to depart, some townsfolk noticed one of their own monks, cowled and silent, standing aboard the Bari lead ship. A howl of rage went up. "You took money to betray our protector!" Several shouted at the monk, accusing him of abetting the theft for a bribe. The mob nearly rioted, straining against the vessels, but with a cracking of oars, the ships began to pull away. The strongest Myrans clung to the hulls until the last possible second, soaked in spray, before collapsing back into the surf. On May 9th, 1087, the fleet from Bari unfurled their sails and slipped out of the Lycian harbor, carrying off St. Nicholas of Myra. On shore, the people watched with helpless anguish as the ship vanished over the horizon. Myra was bereft. Nicholas was gone. The men of Bari knew they had narrowly escaped, but their trials were not over. Legends of the voyage home suggest that St. Nicholas himself closely supervised the thieves turned custodians of his body. Initially, the three ships hugged the Anatolian coast, heading west. At one point, a sudden storm and headwind threatened to drive them aground. No matter how the sailors adjusted their rigging, the flotilla could make no progress. It was as if an invisible hand held them back. The frustrated crew began to wonder if Nicholas was displeased about something. Then one man recalled how chaotic the tomb raiding had been. Could it be that in their scramble, some of the sailors pocketed a few relics for themselves? It was common for those handling a saint's remains to try to snatch a small bone chip or tooth as a personal token, a mixture of devotion and greed. If any of the Bari sailors had done so, they had violated the solemn vow they all took before departing, that no one would keep any part of the treasure for himself. Fearing the saint's wrath, the expedition leaders convened an urgent assembly on deck. They demanded that every man come forward and surrender any relics he might be hiding, to reunite them with the main collection. One by one, Guilt-stricken sailors produced little cloth bundles and leather pouches, revealing purloined fragments of bone. Each piece was returned to the reliquary chest and reconciled with Nicholas's other remains. Then the men fell to their knees and begged the saint for forgiveness. Almost immediately, according to the story, the contrary winds died down and a favorable breeze filled the sails. St. Nicholas would permit the voyage to continue, but only with all of him together. The sailors had learned a grave lesson. Their holy passenger would not tolerate being divided up or treated as plunder. As they crossed the open sea, further wonders buoyed the crew's spirits. Off the coast of Greece, a small white gull appeared and alighted on the mast of the lead ship. The bird showed no fear of the men. Instead, it began to sing sweetly and flutter from ship to ship, even perching on the reliquary for a time, as if giving it a blessing. The chronicler marvels that this gentle creature rendered reverence to Nicholas in its own way, a mute creation giving voice to the power of God mid-ocean. After circling the fleet, the mysterious gull flew off and vanished, never to be seen again. To the sailors, this was yet another sign that their mission carried divine favor. Finally, after weeks of travel and peril, the three ships approached the coast of Apulia. On the morning of May 9th, 1087, the lookout spied the familiar shape of Bari's harbor. News of the expedition's return and its astonishing cargo spread like wildfire throughout the city. As the sailors rowed ashore at the quay, carrying the small wooden chest on their shoulders, they were met with a euphoric eruption of celebration. The people of Bari, from nobles to fishermen, rushed to the docks in an exultant throng. They could scarcely believe the miracle. St. Nicholas, the great wonder worker of the East, had come to Bari. Priests and monks donned their richest vestments and formed an impromptu procession, singing hymns as they went to receive the sacred remains. The men from the ships, weary and proud, recounted their adventure to wide-eyed listeners on the pier. Almost immediately, arguments broke out over where to house the relics. The sailors had vowed among themselves to build a grand new church, a shrine specifically for St. Nicholas, at a certain site in town. They called it the Royal Praetorium, an open area that had been part of the old governor's palace. Some citizens, however, insisted the saint should reside in Bari's main cathedral. Others thought perhaps the Benedictine monastery of St. Benedict, already standing in the city, should guard the treasure. To forestall any conflict, the abbot of St. Benedict's, Elias, came forward with a solution. He persuaded the sailors to entrust the relics temporarily to his monastery church until a decision could be reached. The sailors agreed, depositing Nicholas's bones in the altar of St. Benedict's, while armed guards, loyal to the sailors, posted themselves at the doors to ensure no rival faction or opportunist made off with the prize. The homecoming of St. Nicholas was not without further drama when the Archbishop of Bari, a certain Ursus, got word of the relic's arrival. He hurried back to the city. He had been outside Bari at the time. As the highest church authority, the Archbishop naturally felt he should take possession of the saint and install the relics in his cathedral. But the men of Bari and the populace who had supported the sailor's mission bristled at this. They had risked life and limb to rescue Nicholas. They weren't about to surrender him to the sole control of the Archbishop, who might claim all the glory for himself. A tense standoff ensued. Ursus attempted to seize the relics by force with a group of armed retainers, but the townspeople rallied to the defense, literally taking up swords and clubs to guard St. Nicholas's temporary shrine. In the brief skirmish that erupted, 2 of the Archbishop's men and 1 citizen were killed. Blood spilt in the saint's name. Ultimately, the Archbishop backed down in the face of united public opposition. The people of Bari, together with their beloved sailors, would keep St. Nicholas for the city. To secure that, they swiftly moved the relics from St. Benedict's to a more neutral site, the Praetorium, as originally planned, and laid them in the chapel of St. Eustratius. There, construction immediately began to create a worthy, permanent shrine, the Basilica of San Nicola, literally demolishing old structures to build a new altar for Nicholas on the spot. The armed citizenry kept round-the-clock watch over the holy remains until the new basilica was completed. Pope Urban II himself came to Bari 2 years later, in 1089, to consecrate the basilica and Nicholas's new tomb. At the dedication, the Pope personally laid the saint's bones in a crypt beneath the altar, sealing Bari's claim to St. Nicholas for ages. What the people of Myra had seen as theft, the people of Bari proclaimed a divinely ordained translation, the rightful transfer of a saint's relics to a place where they truly belonged. May 9th, the anniversary of Nicholas's arrival in Bari, became an official feast day celebrated by Western Christians thereafter. To the Greek Christians and locals of Myra, the modern Turkish government, none of this pomp changed the simple fact: Nicholas's body had been stolen. Eastern chronicles would long brand the Bari expedition as an outrageous act of piracy and sacrilege. One Byzantine writer bitterly noted that from the time of Emperor Constantine up to 1087, quote, no emperor or overlord was able to do this, until a gang of Italian robbers succeeded in spiriting away their most treasured saint. But in the medieval world, possession was 9/10 of the law. Bari had the relics, and miracles already began to validate their triumph. Almost immediately after Nicholas's remains were installed in Bari in 1087, miracle stories blossomed. A medieval chronicler records that on the very night the relics arrived, 47 people in Bari were cured of various ailments by the saint's intercession. Those healings include a nobleman with a grave illness, a man lame on one side, several epileptics, 2 lepers, and a handful of paralyzed or deformed individuals. In the days that followed, dozens more healings were reported as pilgrims streamed into the city to venerate the new treasure. Whether exaggerated or not, these accounts served to cement the idea that Nicholas approved of his new resting place. A poignant story even emerged from Myra. A monk there named Mark had a vision of St. Nicholas shortly after the theft. The saint appeared to him and said, quote, "By the will of God, I am leaving the Roman world," referring to the East. "Whither I go on a visit, but here I shall dwell forever." In other words, Nicholas wanted his followers to know that although his physical bones were relocated to Bari, his spiritual presence would remain in Myra to watch over his flock. This was scant consolation to the bereaved Myrans, but it at least allowed them to believe the saint had not utterly forsaken them. Meanwhile, in Bari, Nicholas's cult only grew. Pilgrims from across Italy, France, and beyond made their way to the Basilica di San Nicola, and Bari became one of Europe's most important pilgrimage sites, virtually overnight. As the Britannica observes, hosting St. Nicholas's relics strengthened the city's global prominence, exactly as the Bari sailors and patrons had hoped. The translation of St. Nicholas also had ripple effects far beyond Italy. In late 1096, as the First Crusade got underway, thousands of Frankish and Norman crusaders gathered at Bari en route to the Holy Land. These Western knights normally favored warrior saints, but Nicholas's reputation as a protector of travelers and seafarers resonated deeply with them. The presence of his relics in Bari made him materially accessible to the Crusaders, who prayed for his aid. Through these armed pilgrims, Nicholas's fame and many embellished legends of his life traveled to France, England, and well beyond. Over the next centuries, devotion to St. Nicholas spread across Europe like wildfire, blending with local folklore. Stories of his charity and miracle working were translated into a myriad of languages. By the late Middle Ages, St. Nicholas had become the patron saint of children, thanks to the tales of him resurrecting or saving youths, and a figure associated with gift-giving in early December. In the Netherlands, for example, the feast of Santa Claus on December 5th became a beloved holiday when a white-bearded St. Nicholas visits children with presents. Dutch colonists later brought these traditions to the New World, where St. Nicholas, nicknamed Santa Claus, a corruption of Sinterklaas, eventually merged with other winter folk figures to become the jolly gift-bringer of Christmas. It's a deliciously ironic evolution. The gentle, rotund Santa Claus of modern lore, clad in red and trimmed with fur, can trace his lineage directly back to an ascetic 4th century bishop, a man whose stolen bones once caused a riot and international intrigue. The transformation was gradual and patchwork. Stories of Nicholas mingled with Germanic Yule lore, The marketing of 19th century America gave us Santa's iconic look, and so on. But, at root, Santa Claus exists because medieval sailors stole St. Nicholas's remains. Without the translation of his relics to Europe, Nicholas of Myra might have remained a minor Eastern saint, lost to history. Instead, the theft in Bari launched him on the path to becoming the world's most recognizable saint, the figure who inspires hope and generosity each Christmas season. But he also inspired a rivalry over the relics. Back in Bari, the legacy of that furta sacra endures tangibly in the form of Nicholas's tomb and the mysterious liquid that seeps from it. The manna of St. Nicholas, which so astonished sailors in 1087, continued to exude from the relics after they were enshrined in Bari. In fact, the annual ritual of collecting the manna became a cornerstone of Bari's religious calendar. Each year on the Feast of the Translation, May 9th, clerics would ceremonially extract a small vial of clear fluid from a silver urn atop the saint's tomb, a practice that still happens in modern times. The manna is then diluted in holy water and bottled for pilgrims, who treasure it as a relic with healing power. Throughout the Middle Ages, vials of Nicholas's miraculous myrrh were dispatched across Christendom as gifts, spreading his renown even further. Skeptics note that Bari is a low-lying port city, and Nicholas's crypt lies below sea level, making natural condensation a plausible source of the liquid. In 1925, scientists at the University of Bari indeed analyzed the manna and found it to be pure water, odorless, colorless, sterile, like condensing through the marble in the damp recess of the crypt. Of course, the Venetians have their very own chapter in this saga of sacred robbery. After Bari's coup in 1087, Venice was humiliated at having lost the race, but the proud Serenissima did not give up. In 1100, during the time of the First Crusade, a fleet of Venetian ships stopped in Myra on their way to Levant. Finding Nicholas's tomb now empty of its prize, save for an Orthodox church watched by a handful of monks, the Venetians proceeded to seize all remaining bits of Nicholas's skeleton that Bari's men had left behind. According to a Venetian chronicle, Bishop Enrico Cartarini of Venice led this effort, gathering the less impressive, smaller bones from the saint's grave, essentially any fragment, shard, or particle that Bari didn't take. They even collected relics of other local saints and bishops of Myra as a bonus. These relics were triumphantly brought back to Venice and enshrined in the monastery of San Niccolò al Lido, a church the Venetians had actually dedicated to St. Nicholas decades earlier, in hopeful anticipation of obtaining his body. The Venetians thus claimed they, too, had St. Nicholas, or at least what remained of him. Naturally, this provoked a rivalry with Bari. For generations, the two cities sparred over who possessed the authentic St. Nicholas. Bari had the bulk of the skeleton, including the skull and long bones, while Venice had a collection of over 500 bone fragments preserved in 3 chests at San Nicolo a Lido. For centuries, neither city could definitively prove the other wrong, and a whiff of mystery clung to the Venetian relics. The chests at San Nicolo a Lido were opened only rarely in solemn church investigations, and each time, curiously, the examining abbot of the monastery died shortly thereafter. This gave rise to a superstitious belief in Venice that someone dies every time the bones of St. Nicholas are disturbed. As if to support that notion, the last examination prior to the modern era in 1634 was followed by the abbot's sudden death. Many Venetians privately feared their collection might not be legitimate, especially since Bari was unquestionably producing Nicholas's famed manna, while Venice was not. In 1992, the Venetian church authorities finally decided to resolve the matter with science. They invited Professor Luigi Martino, the very anatomist who had examined the Bari relics decades earlier, to inspect the Lido chests and determine if the bones could be part of the same skeleton as found in Bari. What Martino found initially baffled investigators. The main Venetian chest contained a jumble of bones from at least 3 different individuals, 2 adults, 1 male, and 1 female, as well as 1 child's partial jaw. Alongside them was a large pile of unidentifiable fragments. This mismatch led the first examining team to declare that no, these could not possibly all be Nicholas. Perhaps Venice had been harboring the wrong relics all along. But Martino dug deeper. Noticing the heap of whitish fragments had been overlooked, Martino recalled the historical accounts of the tomb break. According to the 11th century witness Nicephorus, when Matthew entered Nicholas's tomb, he immersed his hands in the liquid and found the holy relics floating. Archdeacon John of Bari likewise recorded that Matthew, searching for the saint's skull amid the oily sludge, ended up putting his feet inside with reckless audacity and emerged soaked head to toe after retrieving the last bone. These clues suggested that Nicholas's smaller bones had indeed been smashed underfoot in the tomb. Martino realized the Venetian fragments were exactly those missing parts: crushed ribs, vertebrae, and upper limb bones that were absent from Bari's collection. Moreover, the fragments' snow-white appearance hinted that they had been treated by the Myra monks with lime or another preservative, explaining why they didn't look like the aged brown Bari bones. Further analysis confirmed that the fragments corresponded anatomically to precisely the bones missing in Bari. In 1993, Martino triumphantly reported that Bari and Venice's relics were complementary parts of the same skeleton, almost certainly the true remains of St. Nicholas. At long last, history and anatomy had been reconciled. The Patriarch of Venice, dumbfounded at first, expressed both chagrin and relief. The Venetians did have St. Nicholas's bones after all, just in a pulverized form. Today, about half of Nicholas's skeletal remains lie in Bari, and roughly half in Venice, with a smattering of stray bits in churches from Russia to the United States. But, thanks to modern science, we know they originate from the same 4th century man. Scientific inquiry has shed further light on these venerable bones and given us a glimpse of the real human behind Santa Claus. In 1953, when Bari's basilica was undergoing repairs, the crypt was temporarily opened, and St. Nicholas's bones were exhumed for study. After 864 years undisturbed, the skeleton was found to be extremely fragile, soaked with the watery manna that had pooled in the tomb. Professor Martino and his team carefully dried and cataloged each piece. They noted that while many large bones, skull, legs, left pelvis, and so on, were intact, the smaller bones of the spine, ribs, and hands were mostly reduced to fragments. The damage was consistent with the historical accounts of breakage. Using measurements, X-rays, and eventually, in 1957, a full skeletal reconstruction, Martino determined Nicholas had been a man of small stature, roughly 5 feet 6 inches tall or 1.67 meters. He was slightly built, certainly not the plump, round-bellied figure of modern Santa myth. Tantalizingly, though, Martino observed that the nasal bones showed evidence of healed fractures, meaning Nicholas had had a broken nose at some point in his life. This detail dovetails with medieval legends that at the Council of Nicaea in 325, Nicholas became so angry at the heretic Arius that he slapped and punched him in the face, earning a brief imprisonment for his outburst. While we can't be certain how Nicholas's nose was broken, the physical evidence of injury adds color to his character. He may have been mild with children, but apparently had a temper when defending his faith. From the skull dimensions, forensic anthropologists in recent years have even produced facial reconstructions of St. Nicholas. They depict a Middle Eastern man with a prominent brow, sunken cheeks, and graying hair. Far from the rosy-cheeked Grandpa Frost of Christmas cards. And yet, seeing that face can spark an uncanny realization. Santa Claus, so to speak, was real. Not as a magical elf, but as a flesh and blood human, whose bones still lie, mostly, in Bari. In December of 2017, scientists at Oxford University radiocarbon dated a fragment of St. Nicholas's pelvic bone that was being kept in a church in Illinois. The test confirmed the bone dates to the 4th century AD, around the time Nicholas died, traditionally dated as 343 AD. Since Bari's collection is missing part of its left hip bone, and the Illinois fragment is from the left pubis, it could well be the matching piece of the same pelvis. Researchers hope to conduct DNA analysis in the future to verify whether all these far-flung pieces from Bari and Venice to Illinois come from the same individual. If they did, it would further vindicate the medieval holy thieves who swore they had the true St. Nicholas. Science, of course, cannot prove a bone is absolutely St. Nicholas. It can only rule out what is false. So far, nothing in the relics has contradicted the claim that these are the bones of Santa Claus. By all accounts, they are from the right time the right age. Analysis suggests Nicholas was in his 70s when he died, consistent with tradition, and even the right personality. A face with a busted nose that lines up with old legends. For millions of believers, however, no test is needed. The miracles and the manna speak louder than carbon dates. Yet, even miracles sometimes come under skeptical scrutiny. The Venetians, as noted, never witnessed Nicholas's relics produce any manna at all. And while Bari's clergy insist the phenomenon is ancient and continuous, the bones have always leaked, as one account put it. There have been some eyebrow-raising discoveries. In 2002, chemists analyzed an old flask of supposed St. Nicholas manna that was kept in Venice, said to date back to the 1100s. The test revealed it wasn't mysterious myrrh at all, but ordinary vegetable oil from the 14th century. This suggests that at some point someone in Venice either faked Nicholas's manna or substituted something for it, perhaps as a devotional practice or even as a scam. In Bari's case, as we've seen, the manna is almost certainly water seeping in. Bari's crypt lies only a few hundred yards from the Adriatic Sea, and the water table is high. The stone sarcophagus is airtight. Engineers found no cracks in it during the 1950s exam, but moisture can infiltrate via the marble platform. Thus, a plausible natural explanation is that the manna is basically filtered seawater, collecting inside the tomb by capillary action. Supporting this, when Nicholas's bones were taken out in 1953, they continued to perspire copiously for some time. The linen cloths wrapping them became soaking wet. For all that, many Bari faithful remain unfazed. Whether manna is condensation or not, they consider it sanctified by contact with the saint. In their eyes, it's a gift from Nicholas, a yearly reminder of his presence among them. If anything, though, the biggest threat to Nicholas's relics is not skepticism, but the silent decay of time. In 1957, after the restoration of the basilica, the bones were re-entombed in Bari's crypt and have remained sealed away ever since. Decades later, in 2004, a team making a BBC documentary, The Real Face of Santa, were granted permission to insert a tiny fiber optic camera into the tomb to check on the condition of the relics. What they saw alarmed them. Dr. Franco Introna, a forensic anthropologist on the team, reported that St. Nicholas's bones were lying in pools of water. The continual manna had created a shallow bath, and some bones showed signs of further deterioration since the 1950s. Introna worried that if nothing was done, the last remains of St. Nicholas could disintegrate within a century. "I am a little bit sad," Introna confessed, observing the eroding relics. "These bones don't belong to Bari. They belong to all the world and to all the people that love St. Nicholas." In 2017, perhaps in part due to such concerns, Bari loaned a fragment of Nicholas, a rib, to the Russian Orthodox Church for veneration. It was the first time in 930 years any part of the Bari relics had left the city. Over 1 million Russians lined up in Moscow for a fleeting glimpse of the golden reliquary, holding that single rib. The overwhelming response underscored how deeply Nicholas, not just Santa Claus, but Saint Nicholas himself, is loved and revered around the world. He's a rare figure who bridges cultures, at once a Christian saint, honored in ornate cathedral liturgies, and an icon of cheerful generosity, celebrated in shopping malls and movies. The tale of St. Nicholas's relics is thus a strangely poignant Christmas story in its own right. It has darkness, thieves breaking into a sacred shrine by night, monks weeping over a great loss, bones hidden and broken and fought over. It has wonder, the mysterious manna exuding from a tomb, storms calmed and signs given, miracles proclaimed by the faithful. It has a legacy that endures in both solemn ritual and light-hearted tradition. Every year in Bari, as the Feast of Translation comes, locals reenact the arrival of Nicholas's relics, carrying his statue from the harbor, just as the sailors did in 1087. And every year, on Christmas Eve, children hang stockings for Santa Claus, never guessing that the inspiration for their benevolent gift-giver lies in a crypt in Italy, in a box of wet bones. The contrast is haunting. Santa, the symbol of innocent joy, owes his existence to a long-ago crime, a furta sacra, committed by men who, paradoxically, believed it was the holiest thing they could do. Those Bari sailors truly felt they were rescuing St. Nicholas, not robbing him. In medieval thinking, the saint himself sanctioned their act, choosing to move where his relics could shine more brightly. Indeed, had Nicholas's bones stayed in Myra under Turkish rule, his cult might have faded. Instead, the West gained a patron saint, and eventually, the world gained Santa Claus. The sailors could never have imagined that their rough deed would echo through the ages in such cheerful guise. As we reflect on this saga, the mood is bittersweet, festive, yet unsettling. In the quiet basilica of San Nicola, a flask of clear manna sits on a shelf in the gift shop, ready to be purchased by hopeful pilgrims. Above, in the apse, a grand painted ceiling shows St. Nicholas himself, gazing down benignly. According to one local legend, Nicholas once appeared in a dream and predicted that his bones would one day rest in Bari. True or not, that prophecy was fulfilled by human daring. The relics of St. Nicholas remain in Bari to this day, silent witnesses to an extraordinary journey. Each bone fragment, whether in Italy, Venice, or scattered across Europe, tells a story of faith strong enough to steal and hope strong enough to endure the ages. Next time you hear of Santa Claus coming on Christmas Eve, remember that his story did not begin at the North Pole, but in an ancient tomb by the Mediterranean Sea. It is there, in the flicker of oil lamps and the whispers of praying monks, that the legend of St. Nicholas became entwined with miracles and mischief. Terrifying and True is narrated by Enrique Couto. It's executive produced by Rob Fields and Bobbletopia.com, and produced by Dan Wilder, with original theme music by Ray Mattis. If you have a story you think we should cover on Terrifying and True, send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. And if you want to support us for as little as $1 a month, go to weeklyspooky.com/join. Your support for as little as $1 a month keeps the show going. And speaking of, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay a little bit more to hear their name at the end of the show. And they are Johnny Nix, Kate and Lulu, Jessica Fuller, Mike Eschewey, Jenny Green, Amber Hansford, Karen Wiemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much, and thank you for listening. We'll see you all right here next time on Terrifying and True.